Good afternoon, Jan.
Hi, Francesco. Good afternoon.
And hello, everyone. Welcome to this fourth episode of What is Therapy?
Hmm.
Jan and I will endeavor, as usual, to be in the present moment. In a way, we strive to approach this as we were in therapy, although the roles are equal here. So co-counselling, I guess, would be possibly closer. But also, and I suppose this is an idea that I'm not sure how completely Jan shares with me. For me, therapy is an ambition. I would like to live every day, every hour, every minute of my life as if it was therapy.
Hmm.
And I think when we need therapy, just because we are so stuck and so affected by trauma and in such a crisis and so on and so forth, and to just fix a very dramatic situation is almost like asking therapy to do miracles. So the therapy the ideal therapy I've got in mind is one that we do every hours of the day, not when it's too late. But some people don't have the luxury of that because they had bad parenting or no parenting and all sorts of traumas.
Hmm.
Uh, right. I guess I'm gonna leave it there. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your context, and I was something that like we have been talking about attention and
Yes.
how when you say like live every day as it's been like a therapy, it requires attention, I would say, and
Mm.
um, and how can we like notice when we get stuck, and what causes the stuckness is, like you said, why people come into therapy, and how can we get more into a flow and noticing our pattern of stuckness. It sounds like a biggest quest, like in life, I would say. So I've never considered that, like what's behind your motivation of framing it like this. That suddenly like stood out for me. Like I haven't really considered what we're what is this thing we're trying to ambition have some ambition about.
I, 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 I'm excited to hear. I feel excited to hear that my unveiling and saying more about our ambition or my ambition is makes you happy. uh, I guess I'm discovering it as we go as well. That's
Mm,
why.
yeah, yeah, and also it's a big ambition to have like
Mm.
how can I live a therapeutic or healing, you can say, also life in general. And it brings me back to the notion of attention that we're trying to explore. Like, how can where is my attention? How can I notice my attention? And and that's the kind of the main purpose, I think,
Mm.
right now.
Yes.
And to bring into, maybe it's helpful for us, I'm not sure, but to bring in some cultural context. We were
Sure.
talking a little bit about, sorry, almost fell off my chair. Just have to turn my phone sound off. Yeah. So
Cultural context. Yeah, I'm up for that.
yeah, we were talking about environments, and we touched upon what I framed as mainstream culture, like how to participate wisely with the mainstream culture who are very maybe outward oriented. How to like approach that kind of environment, and kind of where is the connection in that? If I want to, if I can go on for a little while, it's
Go on.
something to do, but like, how do I frame what I'm doing to the outside environment or the mainstream, with people who are very outward oriented?
So what I'm hearing is at this stage, or at least this week of your life, you've and you told me in the break that you've reached out to some entrepreneurs that hire a space, and it was friendly and welcoming and stimulating, but it was also you being confronted with mainstream culture. I suppose I have a curiosity here to participate more deeply with your story. Why was your attention? Why has your attention been there to connect with this more mainstream crowd, which you don't normally, is not your first choice in life?
Yeah. I guess my motivation is that I want to start to manifest in a very concrete way more and more, so I can offer my services regarding self-leadership, and also on the side, getting more and more in, like, that's one thing, and the other thing is also my studies that affords more and more of the other thing.
Right.
So my motivation, and
it serves three. I'm hearing three separate but overlapping reasons.
what's the third?
So networking,
Mm.
to get a sense of what the environment is out there, because it's an environment of potential clients and stimulating collaborators. So shall I call that networking?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
And sorry, and the second one, how would you label that?
Yeah, that's the second one is studying.
Studying.
Yeah, and
so you being in an office with startuppers, right? With the digital crowd. Please tell me how that relates to your studies.
it's okay, I can try to say something like I've framed it for myself, or I've thought about what I'm doing when I'm there in this environment, and I think it's something to do with my kind of what I'm noticing, what my attention has been when I've been there is several things, but I'm curious about my resistance towards mainstream culture and how things are framed in general, and it kind of provokes my philosophical and existential nerve, so to speak.
In opposition to it.
Yeah, but it's also very it's very like I feel like it's kind of flirting with me in a way, like this environment, because it's very, I would say, like if I have my assumption, probably a lot of assumptions and ideas about this environment, it points to having mode. And I'm really prone, or I really love becoming mode, so to speak, developing.
Being and becoming.
Yeah, being and becoming.
Can you give some context? So before you were saying, I was asked, what do I do?
Yeah.
And you were struggling to provide an answer.
I was struggling to provide an answer because of what I just said. Like,
yes,
the culture, external or culture, I would say, or our culture is immersed in having mode. And that we have to have, it's nothing wrong with having mode, but it's unbalanced, because we have to have things, and we have to consume things, and the becoming mode is something else.
Yes. For me, it becomes, I have a history of shying away or disliking the mainstream culture and creating all sorts of non-mainstream worlds for me. But so I definitely relate to that. But for me, the problem has always been being judged for not being mainstream. But this environment where you are near Oslo in Norway, the impression I get, but I know very limited information so far, is that they were welcoming. But yeah, they wanted to put you in a box, I suppose. What do you do is an attempt to put people in a box, and but it's also very normal. It's almost like, how are you?
Yeah.
And then it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Then I know this is an environment that is mainstream. And so they're asking me this mainstream question. Am I going to describe myself in a mainstream way? So that's the struggle, because I'm not used to perceive myself in a with mainstream lenses. But would they judge you? I guess if they are welcoming and friendly, and it sounds like they were welcoming and friendly, so what?
Yeah.
Perhaps there wasn't so much of an issue this time.
No, it's very interesting to hear that reflected back to me, because I think the judgment lies also with me, So I noticed, being in that environment, that I have my perceived reluctant to endorse the having mode, like to because it's so it's kind of my inner critic is kind of working both ways, and that what's create the kind of struggle. But it's also, I noticed when it's very, it takes some I how to go about this. It's interesting for me to be there because of the struggle, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, I noticed I reframed it spontaneously, my current framing of what I was doing to better match my references to that kind of environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, if I allow myself to kind of continuing this investigation of becoming or being mode that I love in that environment, I'm suspicious in a good way that might afford some development in frame. You can call it like a reframing training or something. That sounds very good. Reframing training. Yeah.
I tell you where I was at over the last couple of minutes. I was listening, but at the same time, I was enjoying the fact that you and I have engaged in circling and counter groups and dialogues, and now with this podcast on therapy, co-counseling, where we are equals. And I was thinking, oh, something is arising in me about needing to track. I felt like I needed to track you. In order to track you better, I felt like I needed to get some of my needs met.
Yeah, sure.
And no, I was fascinated that when we did, if I was organizing a circling, for instance, I sometimes my needs become secondary. Or when we did dialogos, it was more about the needs of the logos, and we would both sort of nurture and nourish the logos, which was in the middle of the room or something. So I'm just savoring all the differences between these forums. Obviously, they are very similar to each other, but also different. So in this case, it feels like getting my needs met in order to track you. It's fascinating because if I'm a therapist, I need to be able to track my clients without getting my needs met.
Yeah.
But in this environment, it feels like I'm already sort of understanding this new environment. And in this context, I need to get my needs met. Just like in therapy, that's exactly why people go in therapy. They want to get their needs met. And they want to have somebody in front of them helping them getting their needs met. Anyway, just to get to my needs, I feel like I need to sort of ground myself to acknowledge where my attention has been. So I feel like for a couple of years during COVID, I was spending a lot of time working, but also not as much as now. I was more into reading than I am now, more into cultivating wisdom. So to hear you connecting with entrepreneurs, I relate to that because I am in a similar phase at the moment. I am pushing my practice, networking with people, for podcast collaborations or to help me out managing my clients. And so, I guess for pragmatical reasons, not completely pragmatical, because these conversations I very much enjoy. So connecting with colleagues or other podcasters would have to do with wisdom as well as networking and establishing my practice, so that I can be more of a digital nomad around the world, and which is very much the next chapter of my life. I want to be in the sun at least half of the year.
Yeah. What I'm really appreciating right now, that you were able to get access to your own needs, and how that you kind of grounded yourself. That I noticed it was also calming for me to be with you in that way. And
thank you.
Also, yeah, and also is also being kind of looking or seeing that, that's a hard word for me to say because it's not my native language. The trajectory that you're on seems like very clear from what I'm hearing, that you have your eyes on, as you said, pushing your practice and being that you have an ambition to be more in the sun, and that's also, that became very clear to me where you're at. And yeah, and yeah, I'm also, I'm going back to the point where you said, yeah, I'm trying to find what I'm doing a podcast about. Like, that's very, that kind of opens up for me a very good state of, like, to be with that openness. It creates some kind of adventurous feeling to it.
Yes.
And that adventurous feeling is by some people called serious play. Of course, this is a Vervaekian, so to speak, a term, but there's something about this way of doing conversation and podcast, and also it sounds like, for me, I like that framing, like serious play.
Yeah, I like that. Also, in contrast with very sort of a set standard or somewhat traditional ways of doing therapy. Obviously, when people are trained, when I was trained in 2010 in person-centered therapy, the importance of boundaries was extremely emphasized, and the therapist maintaining privacy and not disclosing, self-disclosing very little was very emphasized. And it was also, those days is way before Peterson and his crusades to heal the world from political correctness. So it was a very politically correct environment where you could traumatize clients so easily, so you don't do that, and you don't do that, and you don't do that. I felt like it was comparable to be in a seminary, in a Christian seminary, to be indoctrinated to be a priest. There seemed to be all these ethical things, and you don't do that, and all these commandments, and but instead of committing sin, right, is potentially traumatizing people. and then of course the other side of it is that, particularly in America, these people that in theory get traumatized could easily become really sort of victims, victim of the victim mode, where, oh, you traumatized me, I sue you for $500,000, or I feel like we are. So thank you to Peterson and other guys, and other people, women as well, of course. Why did I say guys? We are in a less politically correct environment. But I also, like you, I didn't frequent my colleagues too much. So I'm assuming it's less politically correct now. But, the therapy where we must, this is what, we must decide now that we're going to have 10 or 20 sessions. It has to be at the same time. You can't see a couple therapists whilst you are doing individual therapy. You need to end one therapy. You need to have one therapist at a time. There are all these dogmas, right? And when you say serious play, I said all of this because actually serious play is more appealing to me because we can be more creative.
Yeah, there's a lot there that you shared. So what I'm hearing is that you have also a kind of it's how I heard or how it landed for me, that you have a lot of issues with constraints and categories that may not be what you're may not be a way of like having the more flow in your life, or like on the one side, constraints can be seen as a tool, but it also bring in some issues of that gets us more into that having mode. I have to have therapy in order to and the other way, like I heard you were touching into, is how can I be with myself more and paying attention to myself without the need of a therapist. I feel like I'm going. It was very clear to me when I was starting to speak.
Now, let me just drop two things. I was, I suppose, advocating. Go on.
Yeah, thank you. The notion of serious play is something else than having a confined space in order to develop or to get unstuck, as we talked about. And it's something to do, of course we need ethics, that's a given, but how can we participate with this ethic in a more trajectory as a spontaneous process, like we're trying to do, we in this space that we're in? There's a huge difference how I seeing it right now in a trajectory of serious play where exploration and emergence and energy is flowing more freely. That's kind of what, I guess, I'm not a therapist, but you are, what that people want more of, that kind of serious play and participate, and noticing how stimulating and freeing that kind of mode is. Maybe we can kind of
it's a very complex, multi-layered, Did you want to finish?
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to make a distinction from what you shared about kind of the traditional way of participating with the life, so to speak, and the categories, and more the freeing flow, more like serious play. I think I just wanted to make that distinction.
Serious play in contrast to the more constrained form of therapy, or yeah, a more constrained form of
and
therapy.
Also the constraint. I just wanted to add that the mainstream culture, as we're speaking about, has a lot of constraints in a lot of layers, like that you were mentioning political correctness that slides perfectly into constraints and categories. And what's the very kind of interesting and also frustrating thing with boxes or categories is, if we see that category, you have left all around the context is not there, because you're focused, and that creates a certain kind of tension. At least in my system, it creates a lot of tension, because it's, and I have all these images coming. If I can just kind of elaborate a little bit about that kind of categorization, and I'm going to shut up. But it's like, I was in this bookshop the other day, and I asked the person behind the counter, "Do you have any books about phenomenology?" And she was like, "Phenom what?" And it's a bookstore in the biggest shopping street in Oslo. And I can't go. Can you just, like, do you have any books about that? No. And so it's no books in your system that is about phenomenology. No. But can you look them up? And I have to kind of instruct her how to do her work. It's very peculiar, and she's standing there looking at me like I'm an alien or something. I find that really, like, it's like this mode. Okay, the distinction of I'm having a client or a customer. It's not like, okay, let's try to converse in order to get him. It's not there. Like, it's digital. It's like, no, I don't have any books about that. And it's very peculiar situation to be in, where I have to kind of, and suddenly she said at the end of, I was trying to converse with her, and I was, fair to say, like, I was a little provoked by her kind of manner or something. But in the end, I said, so you search your database, and no books about phenomenology showed up. Oh, of course it did, she said. And I was like, what? So 3 books she had about phenomenology, and she didn't mention it, so I had to draw.
Right. So is this a comment on the mainstream thread?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Right, because I'm sure you had a reason to go in this direction, and I think I knew why, but and
yeah, I elaborated maybe too much, but this is very, it's like people don't notice that there's a person, a human being in front of them, because they're I think it's also related to framing, like, oh, I have a customer, and if I'm in a bad mood, I'm not going to help or something. I'm just making stuff up. In order to see, like, there's an actually human being that is in front of me. Like, that's it's problematic, and that kind of it's a struggle for me when I encounter people who have less awareness about that. I'm being an example because I don't let you come through. So when people are not recognizing that there's actually a person in front of them.
Right. Yes. If this was a therapy session, you were my clients, I would have asked you a few minutes ago, how did that make you feel? How did that make you feel? But in this context, yeah, it did wind you up a bit, but yeah, you didn't take it too personally. But
No.
I suppose in this context, I feel like that you don't necessarily need my empathy.
No, I can also say I can frame this in a way that makes maybe more sense for both of us to participate with, that I find interesting. I'm trying to be helpful, because this is a lot of my own stuff coming up. But
yeah, but that's what we are for.
Yeah,
we're here for our stuff, so it's so good.
Yeah, I guess I can call it like the narrowing of perception into reciprocal narrowing. I find that kind of a notion that we can.
Oh yes, the opposite of reciprocal opening, where there's somebody that's empathizing with you and is actively trying to connect and welcoming you, and it gives you the benefit of the doubt. That's another thing that was probably missing here. She didn't give you the benefit of the doubt. She was like, no, why are you asking me this? Well, for giving the benefit of the doubt is, thinking that people always have good reason to behave in certain ways, right? So yeah, it's a reciprocal narrowing, because I'm not getting that empathy, I'm not getting that openness, I'm not getting the benefit of the doubt. Then it creates an environment where, for me, is increasingly difficult to be open, and I narrow down as well.
Yeah.
It's fascinating also discussing environments, because for a large portion of my life, I was attracted by Marxist theories and the ideas that the environment plays a big part in the individuals. And of course, some people are more affected by people's emotions than others.
Yeah.
But we all are. So this reciprocal narrowing makes sense to me, where even the most enlightened person, to an extent, gets affected. But then people that naturally sort of thrive in the mainstream, I feel like they are potentially less affected by the environment. So they could continue to focus on being an entrepreneur, a startup, and if you're a man, I don't know, going to the gym, flirting with women. Is for me, it's always fascinating to say, does the environment play a part?
Yeah, I think I noticed I wanted to kind of zoom into that notion that we're using now, narrowing, reciprocal narrowing, because there's some, I think that's very interesting dynamics going on there. What is, if you want to explore that, because I think also it has to do with what we're being trying to explore, the attention.
Yes, I also feel like some sort of ethical responsibility to say that, and I want to go there. I'll do my best. The constraints of therapy, I have a natural predisposition, and I feel all of us do, if we have a vocation to do a certain profession. So the boundaries for me, I didn't need to sort of be scared that if I wasn't boundaried, I could be sued or I could be deemed as unethical. So I suppose my objection is with the political correctness, with the judgment. Yeah, is with the judgment, then the fear, doing things for fear of being judged or penalized.
Yeah.
And again, you went to the entrepreneurial environment and they ask you, what do you do? And would I feel judged if I say, I'm here to, well, I'm cultivating wisdom in my life. Right. So I suppose that's my commentary on the mainstream. It's fine so long as the mainstream doesn't judge. I think I've lost you, Jan.
Cool.
So I have no. There is a time and a space for sure for 30 sessions with the client. No messaging between client and therapist. Always meet on Wednesday 6:30 for 30 weeks. Same time, same day, each time. Boundaries to be followed. And of course, it is important also because in terms of transference and counter-transference, when you are in a vulnerable position, trusting somebody to be your a person that's going to focus on your needs, right? A therapist is essentially somebody that's focusing on your needs rather than theirs.
Yeah.
There is a very sort of archetypical relationship with the guide, with the guru, with the priest. And the boundaries make a lot of sense because of this archetypical difference of roles. You know, if you meet exactly the same person who's your client in a different environment, on the train, in Asia, and both of you are traveling,
there's a context dependency, I guess.
The context dependency. So I respect boundaries and I use boundaries in my practice. So I suppose mine was a commentary on political correctness there. But I want to sort of connect back.
I think. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Maybe you know how to connect these two.
I'm not sure if one reference when we lost connection was lost connection. That's funny. It's what Verveke and that Chris Meister Petro, I think his name is. They wrote an article about the zombification or the zombie of Western culture, the zombies.
Yeah,
I haven't read it, but that reference showed up for me. Or and I think also I noticed my urge to try to use other frames because I think I'm a little self-conscious about. I don't want to come I notice my self-image is kind of showing up, and because I want to use also appropriate frames and not kind of go into that more judgy place in a way. But there's something about if you can frame, I notice I have a urge to frame the mainstream culture as kind of kind of a deadness in a way in relating, and opposed to aliveness and flow.
Right, it's fascinating, and maybe this could be the last thread of this chat. Maybe we can add another 10-15 minutes on this, because we talked about startuppers, and I also very much generalized, and I feel like the Gen Z, or perhaps even those who are in their 30s even, the digital crowd is a very mixed crowd. There's incredibly smart, ethical people. Apparently, most people in the most workers in Silicon Valley are somewhere in the autistic spectrum. So I think the mainstream is also. You see, the other day you went to this place with other entrepreneurs, and I feel like entrepreneurs are getting the lines. I don't even know if we can consider entrepreneurs mainstream these days. There's a lot of fascinating characters, and
yeah, exactly. And the diversity is, as you're saying, is very mixed. And
the deadness. Let's go back to the deadness of mainstream. I always thought the mainstream is the average. It's some sort of a superficial, sometimes ugly average of society. Is the middle part. Is the algorithm. Is the mid algorithm zone.
Yeah, this is it's very hard for me to notice. What stood out for your last comment was it's a problem. It's problematic to generalize anything in a way. Like
it is, yeah.
It's kind of fell. It points
like
back to it points back to the distinction about categories and the opposite. I feel like it's kind of doing something weird right now, because I'm very aware that we are in a flow. So it kind of doesn't make sense for me to generalize in this context with you.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's kind of, I can't, it's nothing there in a way. But it's, I think the framing is it's very apparent for me to interact with people who have very, in the first impression, tight categories, because I haven't lived my life in that way. I've tried to put myself into categories, but it keeps a way, like a part of me that likes this flow, art, reciprocal opening instead of narrowing. That's more and more like getting my attention. Like that way of being or becoming is more and more like interesting for me. So it's pulling me in that direction. So I'm not sure how to. I guess I'm saying like it's hard for me to put myself into the correct categories.
Yes. So what comes up for me is how do I deal with people's expectations, people's pressure for me to conform to categories? This is one of the things that stresses human beings out the most. So they bring it to therapy, or they bring it to their friends and partners, and that my boss is pressurizing me, that friend is judging me, and so the mainstream is what would you say that the mainstream is archetypically? The deadness seems to be of connection, seems to be one of the qualities, but if we were to speak to the definition, is that
speak
is
to
that an interesting question to ask you? How shall we define the mainstream? It strikes me as something potentially archetypical, because people bring it to therapy all the time. How do I deal with people judgments, with people expectations, with people pressure to conform to what they want me to do?
What shows up for me in that is also very related to the rise of the AI, or artificial intelligence.
In what way? Because people have
I,
always brought it to therapy, right? Before AI.
Yeah,
In
I
what
guess.
way? In what way it shows up for you?
Yeah. It's what shows up for me is the propositional tyranny.
So
And,
again, the dogmas.
yeah. I think the I think it's deep. I think it's the separation and disembodiment that I'm trying. Maybe that's what I'm sensing, or something. Very what's the word? Subtle. Very subtly, I sense disembodiment or something. Or I'm afraid. Maybe I'm afraid to be in that context because.
So this is your experience dealing with the mainstream.
It's maybe I'm just throwing out some clever words now, but I think that's what I'm struggling with. Is something to do with the pressure and expectation, definitely. And that's kind of yeah.
Let me throw
I feel like I'm going into some weird therapy session with you now, or some. But there's yeah. Sorry, I don't remember your question. And
well, how do we define the mainstream?
yeah, I think from our perspective, if I may come with a proposal, I think it's a general lack or missing connection. Like it's
right.
It points back to what we're doing in a way. Like, if I don't feel connected to myself, how can I connect with you? And it's so many opportunities for us to disconnect from ourselves and from each other. and it's not transparent enough that that's a thing. I think that when I feel like I'm trying to explore it.
Can I throw something in there? I mean, everyday life people, particularly in cities, and particularly these days in this era, people need to go at 100 miles an hour. You need to interact in the shops, and you need to. I mean, it's becoming more digital, like I guess. So maybe that's going to help in a way. But it's also becoming more robotical, like you said before. So it may not help. But anyway, for me, the mainstream naturally arises because we can somewhat, you can be authentic in everyday fast interactions. So for me, what you are saying is a consequence of this transactional interactions. It brings people to be less connected rather than a description of mainstream. It seems to be a quality or a consequence. It shows up as a lack of connection, but it arises potentially. What I'm proposing is that it arises because of fast-paced transactional Western whatever everyday routine.
Yeah, that's definitely. I think that's very very good observation. And that's.
Can we do better, do you think, as human beings? Can we engage in everyday life with authenticity, or would everything? I'm thinking of you entering the entrepreneurs. They are really active, and perhaps they're doing loads of things every minute. They're super efficient. They go to these efficiency courses, and then they ask you, what do you do? And you take a long breather, and you say, and if you really followed your instinct, you would, and forget about the environment, you would have said, well, I'm somebody who cultivates wisdom. You didn't. You told me that you didn't say that, but if because you thought it's not going to make sense to them, so you opted for not. But you see what I'm saying? Then everybody.
I see. Like, what comes to mind right now is what we're doing is quite radical. So we have to struggle with the mainstream, or how our perception is interacting with what we frame as mainstream. Like, it's very radical, and that keeps showing up in different forms. How radical this practice and what we're trying to do is, like, and the only thing I can think of that we can express ourselves in spaces like this with each other who are on the same trajectory. I struggle with this word.
That's it.
Every time, like, is the kind of the big flashing sign for me right now is like, how can we get together and talk about this struggling with mainstream culture? And because it's not a easy, straightforward thing, and it's important. I believe, like, I usually don't use a phrase like I believe, but I do believe that what we're doing has some urgency to it, and it has to be, but it hasn't. It can't be. It can't be a serious thing. It is serious, of course. It's serious, but to go back to the current or the other frame, serious play is something to consider into this. And also, I want to say something that I notice my passion is like, but it's always been radical to go in another direction than the mainstream. That's how development has always been. Like
Innovators, yeah, innovators.
Innovators and discovery of bacteria before people were dying. Like, it's a historical reference, but always been against, or not against, but at least we're not labeled as insane anymore.
Yeah. René
Or
Girard.
maybe we are, but
sorry. Are you familiar with the work of René Girard?
No.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
we sort of ending on a Girardian note here. One of my learning today in my session with you is that he helped me seeing the mainstream as some sort of an archetype, and for me that helps me going into scapegoating, and is like blaming politics, or blaming mainstream, or blaming I don't know, the military industrial complex, blaming newspapers, blaming university for whatever status quo and mainstream they create, right? Because it's historically informed. And it's like, yeah, we can project all this negative stuff about authorities and mainstream culture, but they are inherently, there is a side of it that is inherently and archetypically, I was about to say bad, but to watch out for. And because either becoming very conformist or becoming scapegoating, I suppose my tendency has been to scapegoat and to criticize the mainstream. And I realized that that's also something that didn't serve me well, didn't serve my well-being well. But if I see the mainstream as something archetypical that is constantly showing up in history, whether it's got Trump's face or another face, it doesn't matter.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. And I feel very inspired by this talk, and I'm very glad to hear that you got something out of it. And me too. I feel like this was a great exploration, and I think it's great that we can have these conversations, so we can maybe have some new frames, because I also come from a far left historical path, so it's very easy to go into, so I think this was a great, very helpful discussion.
Fantastic. And just, I would like to remind those watching that what is therapy might be misleading you. I don't know, might create some sort of expectations about the podcast. But at the end of the day, we are really doing more like some sort of a co-counseling, and we are both men. So I suppose this is how co-counseling is showing up between two individuals who identify themselves as men. That's what worked for us, but it may not work to other people, for other people. But hopefully other people listening to this can get out of it as well. I trust.
Yeah, let's hope so. Okay.
I felt really inspired, and I'm grateful, Jan.
Yeah, me too, definitely. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.